Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the smoky, sword-swinging world of Viking bedrooms. And yes, it's every bit as chaotic and complicated as you're imagining. But before we wade chest-deep into sheepskins, honor codes, and questionable personal hygiene, a quick reality check. You probably won't survive this. Like, if you were suddenly plopped into Viking-era Scandinavia right now, there's a good chance you'd be stabbed, sold, or married off before sundown, not necessarily in that order. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you're at it, drop your city and what time it is down in the comments. I'm always curious to know where in the world you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the threshold of a longhouse. It's night, and the air smells like firewood, fermented fish, and the sweaty wool. Inside, it's all shadows and flickers of torchlight. A dog growls at you lazily as you step over the threshold. The warmth hits first, thick smoky heat rising from the central hearth, and then the noise. Voices low and loud, laughter, snoring, babies crying. And beneath it all a kind of buzzing hum. Life happening, love happening, sometimes even against someone's will. A couple to your left is tangled in a straw bed. The wooden slats creak as they shift positions with a casualness that makes you immediately awkward. But no one else blinks. Sex in the Viking world? It's not exactly private. Not in a house where 3 generations sleep in the same room. There are no bedrooms, just curtained off corners if you're lucky, or a carved wooden screen if you're rich. Otherwise, people just do what they need to do, quietly or not. Here, sex is part of survival, reputation and power. Vikings aren't shy about it, but they're not lawless either. In fact, their sexual norms are strict in their own brutal way. A man can bed his thrall, a slave woman, and that's normal. But accuse him of being the woman in bed, of being on the receiving end of anything. Now you're attacking his honour, and that can get you stabbed through the liver in front of a cheering crowd. Speaking of which, your arrival here coincides with a homecoming. A group of warriors is just back from a raid, sweaty, blood-stained, and very full of themselves. Raiding is more than violence, it's a social ladder. Bring back golden stories, and suddenly women start noticing you. Marriage might come later, but tonight, anything goes. You overhear one of the warriors boasting, not about who he killed, but about how many foreign women he bedded. His friends hoot and slam mugs of mead. One of the older women eyes him and mutters something under her breath. You can't catch the words, but the meaning's clear. She's not impressed. Women in Viking society have more power than you probably think, especially in the bedroom. Sure, there's a heavy bias toward men and especially toward landowning men, but Viking women can own property, divorce their husbands and reclaim dowries if they're wronged. If a man doesn't perform in bed, or if he humiliates her in public, she can drag him to the thing, their version of a court, and people will listen. There's a tale told around the hearth tonight, half funny, half horrifying. A woman named Halfrida once accused her husband of being impotent during a feast. In front of everyone, he challenged her to prove it. She did, with help. Let's just say there were witnesses, a lot of mead, and the poor guy was never quite the same again. But don't get too cozy in the corner, that old man leering at you. He's trying to guess your social rank. Hair too clean? Must be a slave or a visitor. And that matters, because sex between social classes isn't just a private affair, it's a public statement. A chieftain bedding a slave girl? Expected. A slave boy catching the eye of a warrior's daughter? Dangerous. The fire pops and you jump a little. A young couple nearby is whispering. She giggles and tugs at his beard, then glances over to where her father has passed out in a mead-drenched snore. They slip behind a hanging sheepskin. Moments later it's rustling softly. You're not sure where to look. Let's pause for a moment and acknowledge something weird and wonderful. Viking pillow talk is real, and it's poetic. Literally. A man might woo a woman with skaldic verse, complex, alliterative, often filled with references to gods and heroic battles, and definitely some sex metaphors. One line you catch tonight is something about laying the oar across the stormy fjord. You'll never look at boats the same way again. Still, even in this heady atmosphere, there's danger. Not just from jealous lovers or overprotective fathers, but from what people say. In Viking culture, insults often target sexuality. Call a man Egor, and you're not just calling him unmanly, You're accusing him of being sexually passive, of taking the woman's role. It's the ultimate verbal nuke, and it often ends in bloodshed. You start to realize that in Viking times, sex and violence aren't opposites. They're two sides of the same scruffy coin. So what's the weirdest part of your first night in a Viking longhouse? It might be this. Nobody here finds any of it weird. The sounds, the smells, the open desire, the strict codes wrapped around it all, it's normal, expected, alive. These aren't horned helmeted caricatures. They're people, breathing and touching and messing up like we do. You curl up near the fire, trying to find a patch of sheepskin that isn't damp. The couple behind the curtain is quiet now. Somewhere a baby hiccups in its sleep. Someone farts. Someone laughs. Outside, the wind howls over the fjord. Tomorrow you'll learn about gods who seduce by shapeshifting, and women who cast lust spells with carved bones. But tonight, you sleep among the real Vikings, in all their tangled, messy, deeply human glory. You wake up to the smell of ash and smoked fish, your backs even sore from whatever counts as a mattress in this world. Mostly straw, a few wooden planks, and, if you were lucky, some reindeer hide. The longhouse is quieter now. Most people have gone out to start their daily tasks, leaving the place ghostly and dim. Only a few figures remain by the dying hearth, one of them an old woman humming tunelessly while stirring a pot. But there's a different hum now too, low, steady chanting, almost melodic. And it's not coming from the kitchen. You follow the sound outside, stepping into crisp morning air, breath puffing before you. The village sits on the edge of a fjord, steep cliffs hugging both sides like ancient guardians. The water gleams like obsidian. Near the shoreline, several people are gathered in a circle. You walk toward them, careful not to slip on the frost-slick stones. In the middle of the group stands a man painted with red ochre, holding a carved staff topped with a bird skull. He's chanting to Freyr. This isn't a random morning worship session, it's a fertility rite. And when it comes to Viking gods and sex, buckle up. You're in for the weirdest theology class of your life. Let's start with Freyr, the god of prosperity, sunshine, peace, and yes, sex. His name literally means lord. He's often depicted with an erect phallus, which Viking artists never hesitated to carve in full, proud detail. Freyr is considered the embodiment of male fertility, and offerings to him could range from sheaves of grain to, well, bodily fluids, if we're being honest. But it's his sister Freyja who really owns the spotlight when it comes to lust and love. Goddess of beauty, war, and sorcery, she rides a chariot pulled by cats and has a magical cloak of falcon feathers. Oh, and she's notorious for being desired by practically every being in Norse myth. Gods, dwarves, giants, mortals. Freyja doesn't just represent sexuality, she commands it. According to some stories, she even slept with all 4 dwarves who made her prized necklace, Brisingamen, just to own it. Others claim she wept tears of red gold whenever her husband Odda disappeared. The myths can't quite decide whether she's a romantic, a goddess of empowerment, or just a chaotic icon. Honestly, probably all 3. But Norse mythology doesn't stop at steamy and stay there. It goes fully off the rails. Like with Loki, the resident trickster god. One time he turned into a mare, got seduced by a stallion, and gave birth to an 8-legged horse named Sleipnir. Not adopted, gave birth to. In another story, he disguises himself as a woman just to crash a wedding. Gender roles? Fluid? Boundaries? Optional. You start to realize that the Vikings' spiritual world reflects their real one in strange, twisted mirror images. Their gods break rules, cross gender lines, and indulge in all the pleasures and taboos that humans struggle with. And that gives people here a kind of cosmic permission within reason. Back in the present, the fertility rite reaches its peak. The red ochre man thrusts his staff into the ground, murmurs something guttural, and a young couple steps forward. They touch foreheads. Around them, the villagers watch silently, not with lust or embarrassment, but reverence. This isn't a party trick, it's sacred. These two are asking for Freyja's blessing to conceive. It hits you then. Sex in this world isn't just about fun or dominance, it's entwined with survival. Every child matters. Every birth helps strengthen the clan, populate the land, ensure that someone will till the soil and wield the axe when you're too old to lift a sword. You drift from the ceremony and find yourself in front of a small wooden shrine. It's shaped like a hut, carved with animal faces and spiraling runes. Inside are tiny wooden figures, some human-shaped, some clearly phallic. A few are even comical. One has a penis larger than its body. Someone's got a sense of humour, or maybe it's meant to be protective. In Viking culture, fertility charms were common. Phallic amulets weren't considered dirty, they were practical, kind of like a rabbit's foot, just more anatomically specific. One of the quirkiest facts you pick up from a chatty old man feeding chickens nearby. Some warriors carried small carvings of Freya in their belts or bags for vigour. He leans in conspiratorially. Not just for battle, he says, grinning. But not everyone in the village sees eye to eye on what's sacred and what's scandalous. A younger man spits near the shrine and mutters about old gods and animal lust. You later find out he's a quiet Christian convert, something that's becoming more common as traders and missionaries sneak deeper into Scandinavia. To him, the open celebration of sex and fertility is heathen nonsense, dangerous even. One more crack in the old world's foundation. This tension is just beginning to build. For now, though, most of the village still follows the old ways. Rites, charms, myths, and all. Sex is holy. It's powerful. It's also completely normal. You're beginning to understand that for the Vikings, the body and spirit aren't enemies. They're tangled together like roots beneath a snow-covered tree. There's one more curious thing you notice today. The stories people tell about gods aren't just for entertainment. They teach lessons about what's allowed, about what's risky, about how much shame or glory your bedroom behaviour can bring. You hear one woman telling children a toned-down version of Thor dressing as a bride to retrieve his stolen hammer. The kids laugh, but also learn. Disguise can be brave. Love can be absurd. Sex isn't just serious, it can be funny too. As the sun dips low again, casting everything golden haze, you head back to the longhouse. You're still thinking about Frasia's tears, about Loki's horse baby, about that couple asking for divine blessing in the open. There's something kind of freeing in it all, something raw, deeply human and just a little bit weird. Tomorrow you'll explore what happens when passion meets politics, when love, marriage and warfare collide like storming ships on a midnight sea. But for now, crawl back into that scratchy bed. Maybe wrap yourself tighter in that slightly fishy-smelling fur. Sleep will come eventually, and so will more stories. You're woken not by the sun, but by shouting, angry, insistent, and very male. You sit up, groggy, heart-thudding, and realise someone's having a full-on domestic dispute outside the longhouse. A small crowd has gathered near the central yard, and you shuffle out barefoot, cloak tails all dragging behind you like a sleepy ghost. Two families are facing off, tension thick in the air. The cause? Marriage. Or rather, a marriage that's about to go very, very wrong. At the centre of it all is a girl, maybe 15, maybe 16. Thin, freckled, wrapped in a cloak that's too big for her. Her father is arguing with a man twice her age, a trader from a nearby village, who's either supposed to be her fiancé or her kidnapper, depending on who you ask. This isn't unusual. In Viking culture, marriage isn't usually about romance. It's about alliances, power, land, livestock, and making sure the family name survives past the next generation of frostbite and sword fights. The girl's mother tries to speak up, but the men talk over her. No surprise there, Viking women have rights. But during negotiations like this, the patriarchy takes the lead. A few elders step in to mediate, and you're invited, well, expected to watch. Because marriages aren't private matters. They're public contracts, and when they go wrong, everyone wants to witness the drama. The girl's betrothal was arranged over the winter, sealed with gifts, silver arm rings, a cloak lined with fox fur, 2 cows, and, this is key, a sword, not for fighting, but as a symbol. The sword given by the groom stands in for his ability to protect and provide. The sword she brings in return, usually from her father's house, connects her to her ancestry. Romantic? Not really. Symbolic? Deeply. But here's the catch. The girl doesn't want to marry the guy, and she has some leverage. Viking law says a woman can reject a match before the marriage is finalised, especially if she hasn't yet shared the marital bed. And this girl, red-faced and shaking but steady, insists that no bed has been shared. Yet. The crowd murmurs. This just got interesting. That's when you hear the word that turns everything sideways. Brudkaup. Literally, bride purchase. Yeah, The Old Norse word for wedding is rooted in the idea of buying the bride. But don't let modern morals run off too quickly. It wasn't as cut and dry as slavery. The bride price was more like a transfer of wealth, compensation to her family for losing a labourer, a daughter, a future mother. Still, it's telling. In a world where women can divorce and own land, they're still often treated as assets in big decisions. You start to get a sense of how complex Viking courtship really is. Not all marriages were arranged, but even love matches had layers of negotiation. Social status had to align, dowries had to be fair, and families had to approve, and sometimes things skipped that whole process entirely and went straight to brudran, bride stealing. That's the fringe fact you stumble into when an older man tells a story from his youth, cackling between gulps of mead. "We took 3 sisters from up north," he brags, "married 2, sold the 3rd to the Vikings." You're not sure how much is truth and how much is drunken embellishment, but the practice was real. In some cases, Viking men would abduct women, often during raids, and claim them as wives. Sometimes these marriages stuck. Sometimes they were little more than legalized enslavement. And yet, some of these unions turned into real relationships. There are sagas of women who were kidnapped and later rose to wield influence as chieftains' wives or mothers of powerful lineages, which doesn't make it okay but does speak to the unpredictable nature of Viking love stories. Harsh beginnings, surprising outcomes. Back in the present, the elders finally reach a verdict. The marriage is off, at least for now. The girl's family must return the gifts, and the thought man will have to find another bride. Preferably one who doesn't threaten to stab him with the ceremonial sword during the feast. The crowd disperses, half annoyed, half entertained. Later that day, you're invited to a wedding feast that does go according to plan. The longhouse is transformed, decorated with fresh pine branches and straw figures of gods. The bride's hair is unbound, something Viking women rarely do except for rituals and weddings, and she's radiant, clearly nervous but also excited. The groom carries her into the house, stepping over the threshold with a theatrical grunt. It's symbolic again, stepping into a new life. There's dancing, drinking, toast to the gods. A blessing is given by a godi, a local priest. And then comes the slightly awkward part. Everyone starts hinting it's time for the couple to seal the deal. Sometimes the community waits outside the bed curtain. Sometimes there's a ceremonial bedding with witnesses. The goal, make sure the marriage is consummated, otherwise it's not legally binding. Romantic night, huh? That's where things get even more tangled. Because while marriages were expected to be sexually functional, a lack of sexual compatibility could become grounds for divorce. If either partner, yes, even the woman, could prove the marriage wasn't working in the bedroom, they had legal recourse. Some sagas even feature scorned wives mocking their husband's lack of performance, usually with very pointed metaphors involving fish, frost, or limp spears. Subtle. And what about love? Did Vikings ever marry for it? Absolutely. While many unions were strategic, there were plenty of love matches too, tales of passion and loyalty that survived even after betrayal or death. Think less rom-com, more revenge drama with an epic soundtrack. As the feast rolls on, you find yourself surrounded by singing, hand-holding, and more than one drunken attempt at poetry. A man with a crooked nose tries to woo you with a verse about a swan that's as white as your thighs. He slurs a bit, but the effort is appreciated. You fall asleep near the fire again, this time surrounded by full bellies and the fading sounds of a community celebrating something share. A marriage that both families and both people actually wanted. You'll learn what happens when sexual accusations become weapons. How insults and court cases shape the Viking bedroom as much as love or lust. But for now, let your dreams settle on fox fur cloaks, strong-willed brides, an oath sealed not just with swords, but with stubborn hearts. Morning comes hard and slow like molasses over cold stone. You're nursing a hangover made of mead, salt fish, and second-hand drama when someone nudges you awake with a boot. It's not angry, more like, "Hey, you'll want to see this." Groaning, you sit up, spine cracking, tongue dry as wool. Outside, a group is heading to the Thing, the local assembly. You follow, shivering as the wind slices through the valley, and your stomach churns not just from last night's food, but from a sense of impending awkwardness. Today's case, a public accusation of need, an insult, but not just any insult. This is the Viking version of dragging someone so hard their reputation might never recover. It's about sex. It's always about sex. The man being accused, a flaxen-haired farmer named Eric, stands with arms crossed and jaw set. He looks like he'd rather be anywhere else. The man doing the accusing, Bjorn, older, burlier and loud, puffs up his chest with the practiced swagger of someone who knows the crowd is with him. "He said I let men ride me like a mare," Bjorn growls, pointing at Erik like he's about to throw something. You blink. Did he just say what you think he said? Yes. Welcome to the wonderful world of Viking legal insults, where calling a man soft isn't about his emotional vulnerability, it's about accusing him of being sexually passive, which in Viking eyes is a full-on assault on his masculinity. The accusation isn't that Bjorn is gay. That concept doesn't even translate neatly here. It's that he acted like a woman. That's the real sting. Here, masculinity is currency, and sex is a way to measure it. To accuse a man of being on the receiving end of intercourse, especially with another man, is to say he's failed in his most basic duty, being dominant. The Vikings didn't police who you had sex with nearly as much as how you had sex. The roles mattered more than the genders. The thing is buzzing. People love a juicy case, especially one involving metaphorical or not so metaphorical bottoming. A few boys giggle behind their sleeves. One old woman just nods, muttering, "Figures." The law speaker steps forward, raising a carved staff to quiet the crowd. His face is lined like tree bark, and his voice is the sound of dry gravel. He recounts the legal definition of need, listing all the phrases that could qualify as fighting words, calling someone arga, unmanly, accusing them of cowardice in bed, saying they're weak, submissive, or, gasp, hairless in the wrong places. The fringe fact here is that Vikings sometimes carved Nid runes on wooden posts and left them near someone's property, often shaped like a man with an exaggerated phallus pointing downward. Yes, downward, which was an insult. These were called nidstong, or insult poles, and they were serious business. Place one on someone's land and you'd better run. It wasn't just a prank, it was curse adjacent. Social shaming at its most theatrical. Back to Björn and Erik. There's a twist. Erik claims he never said it, and now he's accusing Björn of slander. It's like Viking daytime television, and these stakes are incredibly high. If found guilty of enardi, Erik could lose his honour, his property, even be outlawed, literally cast out of society. But if Bjorn's lying, same deal. The thing deliberates. Witnesses are called. A young man says he heard Erik say something like what was accused, but he's not sure. He was drunk, the boy offers, unhelpfully. Another woman swears Erik's exact words were, Björn couldn't fight his way out of a goat pen. Technically insulting, but not sexual. The debate turns into a lecture about what counts as sexual slander, and you learn a lot more than you bargained for. Like how a man could be accused of sorcery, Seda, if he practiced female magic, which also carried sexual connotations. Sorcerers were seen as penetrated by the spirits. Interpret that as you will. Eventually the assembly votes. No conclusive proof. Erik walks away, red-faced but free. Bjorn curses under his breath. The crowd disperses with the satisfied air of people who've watched a particularly scandalous episode of communal gossip. But here's what sticks with you. How seriously Vikings take words. Sex isn't just physical. It's verbal, social, weaponized. An insult can ruin a man, sometimes more thoroughly than a sword ever could. Later that evening, you sit near the hearth with a group of women spinning wool and sharing stories. They've got their own version of things. Men get so upset about being called soft, one says, laughing. But half of them wouldn't last a day with what we go through. They tell you about a woman from another village who accused her ex-husband of being unable to satisfy her, and took it all the way to the thing. She even wrote a verse about it. It ended with a line that roughly translates to, "His sword lies sleeping in its sheath." The women cackle. Not to be outdone, one of the older women says she once watched a man settle a need accusation not with a duel, but with public humiliation. He shaved his opponent's beard while he slept, stole his pants, and tied a dried cod to his belt. "Let the village see what really hangs between his legs," she says, wiping a tear of laughter. You can't help but admire the creativity, and you start to see that while Viking society is steeped in violence and strict codes, it also allows for wit, trickery, and the kind of savage comedy that turns enemies into punchlines. As the night deepens, the longhouse glows soft and gold, shadows dancing along the rafters. You settle into your usual spot and think about how in this world, reputations are brittle, and words are edged like blades. What you say about someone, especially behind their back, can change everything. Tomorrow you'll venture into the weirder corners of Viking magic. Lust runes, love charms, and spells that might make someone fall into your bed, or wish they hadn't. But for now, sleep calls, heavy and slow. Let the fire's hum rock you down into dreams where insults bite, verses sting, and every whispered word might change the course of your saga. You wake to the scent of charred herbs and something much more unsettling. Burnt animal hair. The longhouse is nearly empty, but a fine ash clings to the air like mist. A girl with tangled braids and an armful of bundles motions for you to follow, saying, "Nothing." Outside, the day is grey and cold, but the yard is buzzing with activity. People are gathered in a wide circle, murmuring, avoiding eye contact with the woman in the centre, the vulva. She's draped in layered cloaks, covered in feathers, bones, and stitched runes. Her staff is nearly as tall as she is, carved with writhing figures, and capped with a lump of amber that catches the light like flame. Around her feet, someone's burned herbs, juniper maybe, and something else that might have once been goat. This is a cedar ritual, and you've arrived just in time for the juicy part. Magic in Viking culture isn't just about seeing the future or cursing your enemies. It can also mess with love and sex, and occasionally farm animals, but more on that later. The vulva begins to chant. Her voice is low and rhythmical, almost hypnotic. She holds a thin wand, yes, like an actual wand, carved from hazel and inscribed with runes. She dips it in a bowl of blood and draws symbols in the air. A young woman steps forward from the crowd. She's flushed, nervous, clutching a lock of hair and a tiny figure made of straw and twine. You're about to witness a Viking lust spell. According to folklore, love magic could be used to spark desire, inspire longing, or break apart couples. The young woman whispers a name, and the vulva nods solemnly. The ritual is tailored, words shaped like poetry, movements precise and deliberate. At the height of the chant, the straw figure is set aflame. Smoke spirals upward, carrying a silent wish. Whether or not the target of this charm will suddenly fall head over heels is anyone's guess. But it's clear from the expressions around you, no one takes this lightly. Love magic is powerful, dangerous, and morally fuzzy. Using it can backfire, especially if the gods disapprove. The historical fact here is that runes weren't just an alphabet. They were believed to hold actual power. You find this out when someone shows you a piece of whalebone etched with deeply personal runes, likely intended to attract a lover. Some rune inscriptions are oddly specific. One scratched on a stick and found in Bergen reads, "Kiss me, I'm hot for you." Others are, less subtle. One scratched into a drinking horn essentially says, "The bearer of this is ready and able." That brings you to one of the more fringe facts of Viking history. People really believed you could seduce or repel someone using the right combination of carved symbols, body parts, and whispered incantations. Some spells included ground-up animal bones, menstrual blood, or pieces of clothing. One particularly intense love spell in later folklore involves tying a live beetle into a lover's hair while they sleep. Romantic, right? But the deeper layer here is control. These spells weren't just about attraction, they were about bending another's will. And in Viking culture, that was a huge deal. Honor and autonomy mattered. To manipulate someone's desire, that bordered on spiritual trespassing. People caught using magic like this could be punished, especially if things went sideways. A failed lust spell that led to humiliation or madness could bring shame, not just to the caster, but to their whole family. You talk with a young man who swears he was the target of such a charm. "Couldn't stop thinking of her," he says, voice hushed. "Dreamed of her every night. Then when I turned her down, I got boils." His friend laughs, but his eyes are serious. "You think that's funny? I still have scars." So yeah, there's a dark side. Magic wasn't all glitter and seduction. It had weight, risk, consequence. Later you find yourself in a smaller house near the edge of the village. It belongs to an older woman, a midwife and herbalist. Her shelves are packed with dried plants, carved bones, stones etched with symbols. She shows you a love charm made from birch bark, soft as cloth, folded with hair and sealed with wax. She says it came from her grandmother, who used it to win her husband. "Did it work?" you ask. "For 20 years, she says with a grin. "Then he died falling off a pig cart." She hands you a small stone carved with a symbol that looks vaguely like an upside-down tree. "Don't use it," she says. "Just hold it when you miss someone. There's something deeply human in all this. The desire to be wanted, to be seen, to connect. Even in a brutal, freezing world ruled by steel and blood, people still carved symbols into sticks and whispered names into the dark, hoping someone would whisper back. But there's scholarly debate about how widespread this magic really was. Were these rituals common, or were they fringe practices, exaggerated by later Christian writers to paint pagans as devilish seducers? Some scholars believe the erotic elements of Norse magic were symbolic, not literal, tools for storytelling, not daily life. Others argue that sex and power were so closely linked in Viking culture that, of course, people tried to control one through the other. The truth, as always, probably lies somewhere in between, where old bones whisper secrets and runes hide double meanings. The Vikings didn't separate the body from the soul the way later societies did. To them, desire wasn't dirty. It was sacred, risky, a force to respect and sometimes to channel. That night, as the wind howls like wolves outside and the longhouse dims to a soft, ember-lit hum, you lie awake thinking of the girl who burned a straw figure in hopes of love. Did it work? Did he turn toward her today, surprised by a sudden flutter in his chest? Or is he somewhere cursing his dreams, wondering why her name won't leave his mind? Tomorrow you'll dig deeper into Viking social classes, how the lines between freemen and thralls shaped not just work and war, but love, lust, and the very meaning of consent. But for now, let the flickering runes drift across your eyelids, each one a symbol of longing too deep for words. You wake to the heavy sound of boots on packed earth and the creaking groan of wooden carts. Outside, the village is alive with the rhythms of early labour, buckets sloshing, livestock snorting, and the crackle of dried hay being scattered across a muddy path. You follow the trail of movement until you arrive at a farmstead on the edge of the settlement. It's a large, uneven structure, surrounded by fenced pastures and several outbuildings. This isn't just any homestead. It belongs to a herseer, a local landowner well off by Viking standards. And here you'll witness one of the most uncomfortable, often overlooked parts of Viking life, the entanglement of sex and slavery. Inside the longhouse, the air is thick with smoke and sweat, as usual. The owner, Arnbjorn, is seated at the high end of the hall, laughing, as his youngest son chases a goose between the benches. His wife, stoic and watchful, eyes you briefly before returning to her embroidery. But the real story is off to the side, where several women work the looms and grind grain, silent, careful, always a few paces away from the family. These are thralls, Viking slaves, and they are, unfortunately, woven into the fabric of every story here, including the most intimate ones. Thralls could be born into slavery, captured during raids, or sold into bondage to repay debts. They worked the land, tended the fires, raised the livestock, and sometimes were expected to warm the bed as well. The rules weren't always written down, but everyone understood the silent truths. A master could demand sex from his thrall. A mistress could too. Consent was complicated, often absent. And yet these relationships were normalized to the point that children born of such unions were sometimes absorbed into the household, even freed eventually, especially if the master acknowledged them. You meet one such child, now a young man of maybe 17, chopping wood near the barn. His name is Leif, and his eyes are the same grey-blue as Arnbjorn's. No one talks about it openly, but no one has to. Leif was born to a thrall woman who died during a difficult birth. Arnbjorn's wife, Sigrid, raised him like one of her own sons. Almost. He's educated, trusted, even respected. But not equal. Never quite. You get the feeling Leif knows exactly where he stands. I can fight, he tells you with a shrug. I can marry a free woman, if she'll have me, but I can't inherit, not unless the law changes. He pauses, then adds, or unless someone dies. The legal lines were blurry in Viking society, but social ones were steel strong. Thralls had no formal say in sexual relationships. But what's strange, almost paradoxical, is how some of these connections evolved into real emotional bonds. There are sagas that speak of freed slaves marrying former masters. There are stories of thrall women who wielded quiet influence through their children or their intimacy. And while exploitation was common, so were attachments too tangled to easily label. One fringe fact you pick up from a conversation with the cook who's stirring a pot of something alarmingly fishy is that there were secret marriages between thralls and freemen. Not legally binding, not blessed by the gods, but recognised by communities, especially when a couple stayed together long enough to raise children and farm a patch of land, a quiet defiance of the system. But don't confuse that for equality. You overhear a conversation between two older men complaining about a neighbour who let his thrall eat at the table. One spits into the fire. Next, he'll let her wear his wife's jewellery. The disdain is palpable. For all their flexibility in mythology, Vikings were rigid in class structure. Climb high enough and someone will always try to cut you down. That night, a feast is held in Arnbjorn's hall to celebrate a successful harvest. The thralls serve the food, refill the mugs, laugh when they're supposed to, and disappear into the shadows when the music swells. But you notice one of them, Inga, lingering at the edge of the benches, her eyes locked on Arnbjorn's eldest son. He notices too. Later, when most have passed out or stumbled into bedrolls, you see them vanish behind a hanging bearskin. You don't know what happens behind that curtain. Maybe it's love. Maybe it's escape. Maybe it's another moment blurred by power imbalance and human need. But the truth is, sex in Viking society doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's steeped in hierarchy, context, and consequences. One historical point worth chewing on is that the term thrall itself comes from an old word meaning to run. Many slaves were captured, dragged across seas, and forced into foreign homes. But here, on this quiet farm, it is clear that some have stopped running. Not because they're safe, but because survival demands stillness. The scholarly debate buzzing in your brain now is about how thralls really live day to day. Were they utterly oppressed, or did they carve out agency in small, invisible ways? Modern historians argue both. Some point to grave goods buried with thralls, suggesting affection or respect. Others emphasise brutal laws that treated thralls as property, not people. What you've seen today supports both sides. Inga laughs like someone who knows her worth. Leif walks like a man with half a birthright. And yet their futures depend on the whims of a single family. One bad season, one marriage alliance, one scandal, and they could be sold like cattle. The fire crackles low. The family sleeps. So do most of the thralls, curled in quieter corners of the hall. You lay back on your usual bed of scratchy wool and sheepskin, and try to imagine a world where freedom is not a birthright but a distant hope, shaped by who you please, who you obey, and who you dare to love. Tomorrow you'll follow the trail of side relationships, mistresses, lovers, second wives, and the tangled sagas they left behind. But tonight, let the fire's glow blur the lines between master and servant, power and pleasure, and drift slowly into uneasy sleep. The next morning the longhouse is unusually quiet, just the soft crackle of the hearth, the low rustle of someone sweeping ashes into a corner, and the faint rhythmic thump of a loom being worked in the back. It's the kind of stillness that settles after a long night of things best not discussed. You stretch, pull your cloak tight, and step out into the brisk morning air, where frost clings to the grass like spilled sugar. Today you're headed to a smaller village across the river, where a chieftain named Ketil lives, a man known not just for his wealth, but for his complicated romantic situation. Ketil has a wife, yes, odd, stern-faced and sharp-tongued, famous for her embroidery, and her tendency to make grown men cry at feasts. But he also has a lover, actually more than one. Depending on whom you ask, Ketil has a side chick, a secret second wife, and maybe a milkmaid or two who've gotten very lucky, or unlucky, depending on perspective. And that's not unusual. In Viking society, monogamy wasn't exactly ironclad, especially for men of power. Technically, polygamy wasn't legal in the way it was for, say, Arab or some African societies of the time. But informal arrangements? Absolutely. A powerful man like Ketil might marry one woman officially and then keep others around as concubines and companions, or the ever-convenient household women. The line between mistress and servant was often very thin and very flammable. You meet Ketil at his hall, a grand timbered structure with shields lining the outer wall and a carved serpent coiling around the main doorframe. Inside it's warm and loud, filled with laughter, ale, and an unmistakable edge of tension. Because Ord is seated at the high table, expression unreadable, while across the room a woman named Brynhild is laughing just a little too loudly at Ketil's jokes. Brynhild isn't hiding. Everyone knows who she is. She's not a thrall, not exactly. She's the daughter of a merchant Ketil owes money to, a long-term guest, with benefits. She sits close, touches his arm when she speaks and eats from the same plate. You don't have to be a skald to catch the symbolism. Ord doesn't look at her. She doesn't need to. Her presence alone is enough. She owns half the land the house stands on, and she can, in theory, divorce Kettle if he humiliates her publicly or squanders her dowry. But divorce is messy, especially for women with sons, and reputation matters. So instead, she waits, listens, files everything away like a master tactician. You overhear a whispered story from one of the servants about a previous companion of Ketil's, a girl named Asa who was quietly married off to a distant cousin after she got pregnant. Ord made it happen. No threats, no fights, just a simple rearrangement of social pieces. That's the part of this society that's easy to overlook. Women may not always have direct power, but they are playing the long game. They control the home, the hearth, the inheritance lines, and if you cross them, you better hope your lineage is as strong as your libido. Still, the presence of multiple partners was tolerated, celebrated even, if handled with discretion and skill. You learn that one prominent Viking chieftain had 3 women living under his roof, 1 legal wife, 1 concubine, and 1 that no one would dare label. She had her own room, her own keys, and once settled a boundary dispute between 2 clans with a single letter. They called her the Quiet Knife. The fringe fact of the day comes from a rune you see carved into the corner of Ketil's headboard. It's shaped like an M, but deeper, more twisted. One of the house servants tells you it's meant to protect against jealousy. She shrugs. Or encourage stamina. Depends who carved it. Sex magic again, but this time more personal. Some Viking lovers inscribed runes into their bed frames, jewellery, or even clothing to bind affection, protect against infidelity, or boost performance. It's somewhere between charm and superstition, and nobody laughs when it comes up. Even the biggest warriors here admit that love, real, messy, unpredictable love, is more dangerous than steel. At dinner, the tension between Ord and Brynhild reaches a low boil. Ord compliments Brynhild's dress with the kind of tone that could curdle milk. Brynhild responds by praising Ord's roast meat. Everyone goes silent for a moment, then laughs too hard. It's not just about the man, it's about the pecking order. Who sits where? Who commands attention? Who gets remembered in the sagas? Later, as the fire burns low, you find yourself talking with a skald, a travelling poet with more secrets than teeth. He tells you about the saga of Thorin the Sharp-Tongued, a farmer's wife who took a lover after her husband went raiding and was presumed dead. When he returned and demanded her loyalty, she laughed and said, "I am not a chest to be opened and closed at your pleasure." She later became a chieftain in her own right, husbandless and fully in control. There's a scholarly debate around women's roles in these informal relationships. Some argue concubines were exploited, voiceless. Others suggest many were savvy, choosing comfort and protection in exchange for status or even love. The truth probably exists in the murky middle ground where survival, affection and strategy all blur. Back in Ketil's hall, the music has slowed, and the guests have paired off, disappeared or passed out. Brynhild vanishes into a side room. Ord retires to her chambers, face unreadable. And Ketil? He lingers by the fire, polishing a knife he never uses. You lie on a fur-covered bench and wonder how many relationships in this world are truly about love, and how many are about power in disguise. Tomorrow, you'll explore how insults shaped this world, especially the ones that jabbed below the belt. But for now, let the crackling fire lull you. Love here may not be romantic, but it is sharp, strategic, and sometimes, just sometimes, sincere. The next morning hits your eyes like a swinging shield, bright, cold, and entirely too loud. Someone's shouting across the field, and the sharpness in their tone tells you this isn't your usual argument about goat fencing. You follow the noise, still groggy, until you find 2 men squared off in the centre of the village, encircled by a crowd that smells like wood smoke, ale, and bloodthirsty anticipation. You've walked into a Viking insult match, and not the fun kind. At the heart of it is a phrase shouted just loud enough to echo off the nearby boathouse. "You milk goats better than your wife." The crowd erupts in laughter, but there's a bitter edge to it. This isn't just crude humour. This is need, the art of Viking humiliation. And around here, that's the kind of insult that gets you killed, or worse, publicly embarrassed. The man being roasted, Dag, stocky, red-faced, built like a barrel, is fuming. His opponent, Skari, A wiry man with the permanent sneer of someone who enjoys chaos knows exactly what he's doing. His words aren't just meant to sting, they're meant to ruin. Because in Viking society, insult isn't about hurt feelings, it's about honour, masculinity and social standing. And if you target a man's sexual prowess, or worse, his role in sex, you're not just poking fun, you're challenging his place in the social hierarchy. Dag lashes back. He accuses Skari of letting his wife take lovers while he counts sheep. Someone in the crowd makes a bleating noise. Someone else drops their mug in shock. It's officially gone nuclear. You're told by one of the onlookers, a snickering blacksmith with arms like tree trunks, that this is a flyting, a traditional insult exchange, like a rap battle, but with more alliteration and fewer beats, and it can escalate into violence fast. One wrong phrase and you're in a holmgang, a duel to the death, or at least until first blood, depending on how mad you are and whether your mother's watching. Vikings had a real talent for sexualized insults. They didn't just accuse you of cowardice or laziness, they accused you of being penetrated, soft, womanly. Being called Arguur was the nuclear option, suggesting that not only were you sexually passive, but that you enjoyed it. In their world, that wasn't just an insult, it was a reputational apocalypse. Now here's where things get fascinating. While men threw these jabs around like spears, women had their own arsenal. You overhear a story from a woman at the edge of the crowd who whispers with obvious glee about a feud between two rival farmers' wives. One accused the other of brewing ale so weak, even her husband can swallow it. The implication? You guessed it. Her husband wasn't very manly. The response? The other woman sewed an image of an inverted phallus into her rival's cloak right at the hem. Quiet. Devastating. You later come across a carved wooden post stuck in the mud behind someone's barn. It's a needstung, a shame pole. It's got a crude face, exaggerated genitals pointing downward, of course, and runes scratched along the shaft. The message reads something like, "May the trolls take your manhood and your barley crop." Viking poetry at its finest. The fringe fact here: these poles weren't just insults. They were borderline magical curses. Planting a needstung was considered such a public shaming that entire families would move villages rather than live under its shadow. In some cases, the victim would be considered nithing, a kind of social dead man walking, stripped of honour and unworthy of community. And it didn't stop at wordplay. Some of these insults were immortalised in skaldic poetry, elaborate verses packed with double meanings and veiled references to private affairs. One famous saga includes a poem comparing a rival's courage to a limp eel in a winter stream. Another describes a man's breath as the scent of cowards and unwashed groins. These verses were shared, remembered, and sometimes passed down for generations. But it wasn't just about trash talk. These verbal battles had consequences. If you insulted someone sexually and couldn't back it up with proof, or didn't win the resulting duel, you could be taken to the Thing. If found guilty of NED, you might be fined, outlawed, or even executed, depending on how public the insult was and who you'd offended. It was law, but also theatre, and everyone watched. You later sit down with an old woman named Halla, who tells you about a time she witnessed two brothers insult each other so viciously during a feast that their mother slapped both of them and poured their ale onto the ground to spare the gods from hearing such nonsense. She smiles. They fought the next morning anyway. The prettier one lost. There's a scholarly debate you roll over in your head as the firelight flickers that night. Was all this toxic masculinity? Or was it a code of honour trying to keep chaos in check? Some historians argue that Viking culture was rigidly patriarchal, using shame as a tool to enforce conformity. Others point out the complexity of these exchanges, how wit, courage, and even humour could earn respect regardless of gender or class. You lean back against the log wall of the longhouse, still hearing echoes of Skari's insult battle in your head. Today the duel was avoided. Dag stormed off red-faced, while Skari toasted himself with someone else's mead, but you know it's not over. These things fester, they burrow, and sometimes they end in blood. Tomorrow you'll shift into something stranger. The women who fought with axes, the men who dressed as women, and the blurry, myth-soaked edges of Viking gender. But for now, let your thoughts settle in that strange space between words and wounds, because in this world, they're often the same thing. By now, you've accepted that Viking society doesn't do simple, It's not all blood and beards or even just mead and manhood. It's tangled, contradictory, weirdly flexible in some places and rigid in others. That truth slaps you square in the face today, when you're handed a sword by a woman who looks like she's wrestled bears for breakfast and probably won. Her name is Runa, and she doesn't just wear trousers and swing an axe, she leads a raiding crew, and no one seems the least bit surprised. You've heard whispers before, shield maidens, women who fought like men and sometimes better, their names threaded through sagas like scattered meteors. But standing here, watching Runa spar with two younger men and absolutely ruin their posture and pride, it's clear these aren't just legends. They're flesh, blood, and calloused knuckles. Runa is as much a warrior as any man here, and arguably twice as feared. Still, it's complicated. Not every Viking village would welcome a woman like her so easily. In some places, warrior women are celebrated. In others, they're tolerated or seen as outliers, a kind of necessary myth for rallying spirits, not everyday reality. But Runa doesn't care about your categories. She sharpens her axe, binds her breast tight beneath a leather vest, and eats more smoked mutton than most men at the table. She calls herself Hersa when she wants, and Shield Maiden when she's feeling poetic. What's striking is how gender roles here bend in surprising places. For all their obsession with honour, strength, and sexual dominance, Vikings didn't always see identity in binary terms. Men could practice woman's magic, cedar, the same kind of sorcery you saw the vulva use earlier. It was taboo, yes, even shameful at times, but powerful and useful. Odin himself, the king of the gods, was a cedar user. The All-Father in a dress, whispering spells, wrap your head around that. Of course, Loki takes it to a whole different level. The god of chaos doesn't just break rules, he pretends they never existed. He shifts into animals, into women, even into pregnant mares, and one time gives birth to a horse. The scholarly debate here is a firestorm. Was Loki gender fluid, or just a narrative trickster using any tool to win the game? Some say he embodies a shamanic role, one that predates binary roles entirely. Others argue he's a warning, a figure of mockery and moral caution. But it's hard to mock a god who once birthed an eight-legged beast and handed it to Odin like a party favour. Back in the mortal realm, you meet a man named Halli who's a weaver, and proud of it. He wears finely made tunics and walks with a kind of swaying grace. People nod to him in respect. He's not a warrior, but he's not dismissed either. You ask one of the villagers about him, expecting a snide comment. Instead, they shrug. He makes good clothes, and he's killed 2 men in duels. Why would we care how he walks? That's the thing. In this world, your value isn't based solely on who you are. It's what you can do. Can you fight? Can you feed a family? Can you recite poetry well enough to move a room to tears? If yes, you earn a place. Not always equal, not always kind, but a place. There's even evidence, fragmented, debated, whispered in corners of academia, that same-sex relationships existed and were, at least in some cases, tolerated. You hear about 2 men, lovers once, who were buried side by side with their weapons and rings. Their story's been retold a dozen ways, as blood brothers, as tragic friends, as something more. The truth is lost in the dirt, but the bones lie together still. The fringe fact you pick up comes from an old carving on a drinking horn. 2 figures, both wearing dresses, locked in an embrace. No one's sure what it means, a jest, a love story, a ritual. Either way, the image survived. Someone made it. Someone kept it. That has to count for something. You sit with Runa later that night, the 2 of you sharing a bowl of thick stew and listening to the crackling logs spit sparks into the smoke-drenched rafters. She tells you about her first kill, how she was mistaken for a boy until she buried a blade in someone's ribs. After that, she says, chewing thoughtfully, no one cared what I looked like. She tells you about lovers she's had, men and women, and how it was easier when she kept moving from village to village. People don't mind a strange story, she says, as long as it comes with loot. Still, even Runa has lines she can't cross. She can't marry unless she settles down. She can't inherit land unless a relative dies. And if a man calls her Arga, it's still an insult. Still a fight waiting to happen. The rules may bend, but they never quite break. You ask her if she wants children. She shrugs. Maybe, one day, with someone strong or clever or both. Then she grins. Maybe I'll raise them to be neither. The scholarly conversation around Viking gender continues to evolve. New graves are found, women buried with weapons, men with beads and brooches. DNA studies reveal surprises, and the picture gets blurrier. The past refuses to fit neatly into modern boxes, and maybe that's the point. Tonight, as you curl up beside the fire again, the noise of the hall feels different, less like chaos, more like a song with too many verses and not enough chorus. You close your eyes thinking about Loki in a gown, Odin whispering spells, and Runa sharpening her axe by starlight. This world is jagged and rough, but every edge hides a story. Some loud, some whispered, all waiting. Tomorrow, you'll set sail on a longboat and learn what happens when desire simmers at sea, far from land and even further from rules. But tonight, rest easy in the glow of a fire that welcomes anyone strong enough to survive the heat. Dawn arrives sharp and wet, mist rising off the fjord like the breath of sleeping giants. You're wading through knee-high grass toward the docks, where a longship bobs gently in the current, its serpent prow slicing the fog like a warning. Today, you're shipping out, literally. Not on a raid, thankfully, but as an extra pair of hands on a routine coastal journey. Your company, 20 men, 3 women, and more suppressed sexual tension than anyone's admitting to. Life on a Viking longboat isn't glamorous. It's crowded, wet, and smells like sweat, wet wool, and fish stored under the benches. But it's also strangely intimate. There's no privacy out here. You're pressed shoulder to shoulder, day and night, with people you barely know and yet can't avoid. You're rowing in rhythm, sleeping tangled in fur, sharing bread, jokes, and sometimes more than just warmth. By midday, someone's already flirting. A broad-shouldered warrior with salt silver hair starts singing a dirty verse about sailing into warm harbours. A woman a few benches back, Svala, leather-clad, braids swinging like a whip, rolls her eyes but smiles. It's obvious they've done this before. The others smirk, clearly enjoying the show. That's your first clue. Viking longboats weren't all business. They were crucibles of human energy, raiding, yes, but also bonding. And when you're stuck for weeks in a floating wooden bathtub with no privacy and no release valve, things get complicated. People form attachments, sometimes fleeting, sometimes passionate, sometimes dangerous. You overhear a hushed conversation between 2 younger rowers after dark. They're giggling breathless, tangled in the blankets under a half-rotted sailcloth. They think no one hears them. Everyone hears them. No one says a word. Vikings didn't have rigid rules against sex during travel, but discretion mattered. Affairs between shipmates could be seen as strengthening bonds or threatening unity. A captain might tolerate a lover's quarrel between deckhands, but if it disrupted the group or caused jealousies to fester, that's how mutinies start. Or worse, duels. At sea, tempers rise as quickly as waves. You talk to the helmsman, Ulf, a man with eyebrows like storm clouds and a voice like thunder in a keg, about relationships aboard. Happens all the time, and he grunts, chewing dried fish, but keep your head and don't touch the captain's sister. Fair enough. What's fascinating is how this confined space amplifies everything. A look lasts longer, a joke carries weight, and when land disappears from view, people seem to unbutton a little, literally and metaphorically. Even the stoic types start swapping verses. One bearded warrior with too many teeth recites a love poem he says he wrote for a woman back home, though the phrasing, her eyes sharp as a forge hammer, leaves room for interpretation. You learn a fringe fact from one of the older women aboard, Ingrid, who claims to have once travelled to the Shetlands and seduced a monk using only a loaf of bread and a charm carved into her belt. You're not sure what part of that story is true, but she swears the long voyages made everything feel urgent. When you don't know if you'll see home again, she says, you take what you can, even if it's a cold blanket in someone else's hands. And it's not just romance. Same-sex relationships happened here too, whispered, behind barrels, maybe hidden in plain sight. A quiet glance exchanged during midnight watch. A blanket shared longer than necessary. You spot 2 younger men, always sitting together, always watching each other's backs. One has a token around his neck, a carved piece of wood shaped like a serpent biting its own tail. The other wears a matching one on his wrist. No one says anything, no one needs to, and you remember the sagas that hinted at love on the sea. One speaks of 2 warriors who during a storm confessed feelings they'd hidden for years. The storm passed. They didn't speak of it again, but they never fought in different units after that. Another tale, less poetic, involves a raider seducing an Irish captive mid-crossing. She stabbed him with a fish hook. The story is told with equal parts horror and admiration. Still, there's a rule no one breaks: forced affection is punished. Rape on the ship, especially among the crew, is an unforgivable breach. It brings shame, breaks oaths, fractures unity. One man, a thin, greasy rower with wandering hands, is thrown overboard mid-journey. No trial, no shout, just a splash. The message is loud and final. There's scholarly debate about how romantic Viking seafaring really was. Some argue that the image of the rugged raider with a secret lover is pure fantasy, dreamed up by modern writers with too many candles and too few citations. Others point to poetic fragments, archaeological clues, matching burial goods, shared symbols, nicknames carved into bones. It's hard to know what's legend and what's life. What you do know, rocking gently on the sea as gulls cry overhead, is that this boat holds more than warriors. It holds stories, lovers, fears, secrets. The sea becomes its own kind of stage and everyone plays a role, however briefly. That night, with the stars spread overhead like a tattered wolfskin, the crew settles into clusters of bodies and breath. There's warmth beneath the furs. A shared flask passes from hand to hand. Somewhere near the prow, soft laughter bubbles up from under a cloak. Two people slip away toward the stern. You close your eyes, back sore, legs stiff, heart strangely full. Out here, desire is stripped bare. No halls, no shame poles, no in-laws, just the thrum of waves against wood, the sigh of someone next to you, shifting in their sleep, and the feeling that even in a world this cold and brutal, someone might still reach for your hand in the dark. Tomorrow you'll return to shore and dive into the secretive world of Viking poetry, verses that conceal, reveal, and flirt more effectively than any glance. But tonight, let the water rock you, soft and steady, as you dream of sails, sparks, and stolen moments at sea. The longboat noses into the harbour like a beast returning from a hunt, battered, proud, and smelling of salt and sweat. As the crew disembarks, stretching sore limbs and spitting curses at the gulls, the village comes alive to greet them. There's cheering, waving, the heavy clomp of boots hitting dry land. But what really draws your attention, once your feet are on steady earth again, isn't the shouts or celebrations. It's the quiet murmur of a voice reciting a poem, low, rhythmic, and laced with innuendo so rich it could grease a cart axle. The speaker is a skald named Thori, grey-bearded and sly-eyed, with a drinking horn slung like a weapon across his shoulder. He's gathered a small crowd by the smithy, where he's spinning verse like thread from a loom. His latest poem compares a woman's hips to the curves of a longship, her sighs to the creaking of oars, and her kisses to mead warmed on a warrior's tongue. You blink. Half the listeners are nodding solemnly. The other half are trying not to laugh out loud. Welcome to the less talked about but absolutely vital part of Viking culture, love poetry, or, more accurately, sex poetry disguised as love poetry wrapped in metaphor and delivered with the straight face of a man talking about the weather. Viking poetry wasn't just for elegies or boasting. It was one of the primary tools of seduction. Skalds, court poets, travelling bards, drunken geniuses could make or break a reputation with a single stanza. And when it came to romance, they didn't hold back. The metaphors might be layered in seafaring and battle imagery, but make no mistake, that verse about guiding my prow into your stormy cove is not about navigation. You spend the afternoon trailing Thori, who seems to know everyone, and owes most of them money. He offers you a crash course in skaldic seduction, which includes not only clever phrasing but rhythm, delivery, and the all-important smirk. He tells you of a warrior who once wooed a chieftain's daughter with a single verse that compared her lips to frost on steel. She married him 3 days later. Thori then adds, though he died 2 weeks after, she wasn't thrilled with the verse about her ankles. The poetry isn't just flirtation, it's reputation. A man known for his words was often as respected as one known for his sword. A woman who could compose a sharp retort in verse? Terrifying, in the best way. There's a saga about a woman named Helga who was proposed to by 3 men in 1 week. She wrote a short poem for each. The one whose poem included a pun about his own beard was accepted. The one who called her fair as the moon was mocked for lack of originality. The third, well, his verse involved livestock. It didn't end well. What makes these poems so compelling is their balance. They're dirty, yes, but never vulgar. Or at least rarely vulgar. The best skalds could craft double meanings tighter than a blacksmith's knot. A good poem could be read aloud in mixed company and still make the intended target blush. Subtlety was half the seduction. You even find scraps of carved poetry in odd places, on the handle of a comb, on the inside of a shield rim, on a fishbone left as part of an offering. These fragments often suggest longing, regret, or that all-too-human ache of waiting. One simply reads, "Her laugh unmans me more than winter." Another, found on a ring, says, "For your hand I'd unarm my heart." And then there are the riddles. Viking love riddles were especially outrageous, and everyone knew it. Delivered with wide-eyed innocence, they ask things like, "What stands tall in the morning is held in hand at noon, and sleeps in a sheath by night?" Spoiler, not a sword. These riddles served as flirting tools, games, and occasional drinking contests. Everyone pretended not to get the joke. No one was fooled. The fringe fact you pick up from an elderly weaver who once served in a noble house is that some women used poetry to test their suitors. One noblewoman would only accept proposals delivered in alliterative verse. If the man stumbled, she refused to marry him. She died single. Her poetry, however, was passed down and later used by a bishop to win debates. True love? Maybe not. But literary legacy? Secured. Still, not all verse was met with applause. Accuse someone of poor performance in a poem, and you'd better have a weapon in reach. One skald wrote a verse implying a rival tossed his sword too early in battle. The man challenged him to a duel at dawn. The skald declined and disappeared that night, leaving only the verse nailed to a tree. There's ongoing scholarly debate about how much of Viking poetic tradition was genuinely romantic versus satirical. Some experts argue the vast majority of preserved poems were meant to entertain, not woo. Others suggest that in a culture where emotions weren't easily voiced, poetry served as a rare window into real human vulnerability, longing masked as cleverness. By dusk, the villagers are tipsy and flushed from a full day of verse. You sit near the fire pit, sipping warm mead, listening to Svala recite a biting little stanza she composed herself. It involves her ex, a broken cartwheel, and some anatomically improbable metaphors. The crowd howls, someone adds a line, the poem grows, and that's the secret, you realise. Viking poetry wasn't static. It was alive, evolving with every voice, every echo. It seduced, it shamed, it praised and prodded. In a world where emotions were often hidden beneath armour, poetry let them slip through like candlelight under a door. Tomorrow you'll witness a fertility rite that makes all of this look subtle. Swords, symbols and ritual that turns myth into muscle memory. But for now, fall asleep with half a stanza rolling through your thoughts, soft and suggestive. Her breath, warm as a hearth at sea, burns sharper than my axe can be. You wake to drumming. Slow, rhythmic, not quite musical, more like the heartbeat of something older than civilization. The village feels different today. There's a hush in the air, a tension that isn't fear exactly, but a kind of ritual seriousness. People move quietly, wrapped in furs, faces painted with streaks of ash and ochre. Children are kept close, tools lie untouched. It's a feast day, but not for gods of war or trade. This one's for Freya, goddess of love, lust, and the life that follows both. You're invited, more like swept, into the procession, where men and women walk side by side through the forest path leading to the old stones. A ring of upright monoliths waits at the forest's edge, mist swirling between them like spirits in a trance. At the centre, a carved wooden idol of Freya watches with wide, almond eyes, her torso adorned with beads, bones and flowers now wilting in the cold air. Today's rite is about fertility, of crops, of livestock, of people. The old women whisper that if the gods aren't honoured properly, there'll be no babies born before next winter, no strong harvest, no animals fat enough to butcher. And so they come, to dance, to pray, to perform, and yes, to get a little freaky in the name of divine balance. The ceremony begins at midday, and it's beautiful at first. The community circles the stones, singing low, haunting melodies that feel more felt than heard. A bowl of barley is passed from hand to hand, then scattered at the base of the idol. Someone brings out a sword, long, gleaming, symbolic, and lays it across a carved wooden cradle. The symbolism here is not subtle. Then things get wilder. A man and a woman step forward, masked, his in the shape of a stag, hers a boar. Both sacred animals to Freya and her brother Freya. They begin a dance, but it's more than a dance. It's a pantomime of seduction, courtship, union. The movements are exaggerated, sensual, but ritualized. At one point the man lowers the sword to the ground and the woman straddles it, arms raised. It's quiet, but the meaning is deafening. You glance around, expecting awkwardness, blushing, but no, this is all sacred theatre, not scandal. No one snickers, no one rolls their eyes. In this space, fertility isn't crass, it's vital, spiritual. Sex isn't separate from life, it is life. They understand something modern cultures often pretend not to. The divine lives in the body, in desire, in the trembling breath before release. That includes actual physical participation, though not everyone takes part. After the dance, the masked couple leads others into the forest in pairs, some holding hands, some laughing softly. You're told that what happens there varies, sometimes symbolic acts, sometimes more, but all consensual, all blessed by the rite. You stay behind, lingering with the elders, watching the fire crackle and send sparks into the sky. One of them, a woman named Solveig, leans close and tells you a fringe fact. In some places, young couples would deliberately lose their virginity on this night, beneath the trees, believing Freyja would bless their union. It's not sin, she says, spitting into the fire. It's survival. Later, you're invited into a smaller ritual by the women of the village. Inside a hut scented with herbs and thick with smoke, they pass around a carved idol of Freyja, small enough to fit in a palm. Each woman whispers a name, a wish, a regret. You hear only snippets. A son with strong lungs. A lover who stays. No more miscarriages. It's intimate, and it floors you. The things they say out loud here would stay locked in silence in most places. Viking society was brutal, sure, but in these quiet rituals, you see a softness, a reverence for the raw magic of creation. It's not about male dominance or female submission, it's about balance. Freya and Freyja, blade and sheath, fire and earth. The rite honours both. The scholarly debate here gets fiery. Some academics argue these fertility rites were symbolic, more theatrical than literal. Others insist on first-hand records and sagas that imply physical rituals, even orgiastic elements. The truth, again, is probably somewhere between scholarly paper and oral tradition passed down like a family recipe. The stories are too specific, too alive to be entirely fiction. By dusk the fire's low and most of the crowd has either wandered home or found a partner to linger with under the pines. You catch sight of the masked pair from earlier, now unmasked, curled together in a blanket, whispering. You recognise them both. One is the stoic carpenter who fixed the longhouse roof last week. The other is a merchant's daughter known more for her sharp bargaining than soft looks. Tonight, though, she's radiant. You ask someone what becomes of the couple after the rite. Sometimes nothing, they say, sometimes everything. A baby, a marriage, a legend. You walk back alone, the sky darkening, the last embers of the ritual still glowing behind your eyes. It's not lost on you how different this feels from the longhouse flirtations, the political pairings, the insult duels. This isn't about status or ego. It's about longing and life and the old ache that hums just below the skin, the one that existed before language, and will probably outlive fire. Tomorrow you'll step into the warm fog of Viking bathhouses, where nudity and social rules soak together in cedar steam. But tonight, you sleep beneath a sky full of stars that watched 1,000 similar rituals before this one, and will keep watching long after you're gone. You wake with your muscles aching in ways that suggest you danced harder than you remember. There's flower pollen in your hair, soot on your cheek, and a faint memory of someone handing you a carved charm shaped like a knot. It's hard to say whether it was a romantic gesture or just good luck, but either way, you're keeping it. Today, after all the lusty rituals and poetry-laced passion, you're ready for something calmer. Cleaner, literally. So you head to the bathhouse. Now, if you're picturing some Roman-style marble sanctuary with fountains and slaves feeding grapes, slow down. This is a Viking bathhouse. Smaller, smokier, and about as luxurious as a pine-scented smoke lodge, built by people who think soap is for festivals. But don't let the rough appearance fool you. These people love to bathe. They bathe often. Some say weekly, some say even more, which is practically obsessive for the early medieval world. The Anglo-Saxons once joked that Vikings were too clean, accusing them of luring English women away with frequent washing and good hair. You approach the low, timbered building near the stream and step inside. Instantly your lungs fill with damp cedar, moss, sweat and steam. It's humid. dim, intimate. Naked figures shift in and out of the mist, silhouettes blurred by the fog and candlelight. There's soft laughter, the slosh of water in wooden tubs, and the slap of birch branches being used to improve circulation, or just lightly beat the stress out of each other. You find a spot near a large stone tub where a man with tangled red hair pours hot water over his shoulders and sighs like he's being reborn. A young woman next to him scrubs her arm with what looks like a lump of gritty soap made from ash and animal fat. They chat casually, naked as the day they were born, and no one so much as flinches. This, you realise, is where social tension melts. The bathhouse is neutral ground. Warriors and merchants, women and men, young and old, they all come here to soften the armour, both literal and emotional. You sit beside an old woman named Ragnar, who offers you a rough cloth and points to a nearby bucket. Scrub your back. No one likes a dusty spine. You laugh but obey. There's something strangely liberating about this space. Everyone is exposed, but no one is vulnerable. Modesty isn't the default. It's context-based. Out there, you don't flash ankles without raising eyebrows. In here, ankles are the least revealing thing on display. You overhear a couple across the room flirting with the sort of casual elegance that comes from knowing each other's bodies without needing to own them. She makes a joke about his sunburn. He threatens to splash her. A few minutes later, they're sitting hip to hip, sharing a ladle of cooled water, and murmuring something that probably isn't about the weather. Bathhouses like this weren't just for hygiene, they were for connection. Here, secrets spilled with the water. Lovers whispered plans. Political alliances were negotiated between sweat and steam. In some sagas, trysts are born in these very rooms, where the heat makes everyone's inhibitions as limp as the towels. The fringe fact you pick up today comes from a man named Catil, who leans over mid-scrub to explain that some bathhouses were used for matchmaking. There was a woman in my uncle's village, he says, who claimed she could smell a man's marriage potential when he sweated. You raise an eyebrow. He nods solemnly. She married 4 times. There's even a touch of eroticism to the rituals themselves. The use of oils, the rinsing of hair, the brushing of skin with fragrant herbs. You watch as a younger woman gently braids another's wet hair, their laughter low and constant. It's impossible to tell whether they're lovers, sisters, or just close friends. It hardly matters. But it wasn't all softness. In some communities, bathhouses were watched closely, especially when tensions ran high. There are stories of assassinations that happened in the steam, of jealous husbands waiting outside with axes. One saga tells of a warrior who discovered his wife's affair by finding someone else's boots next to her towel. He left them there, along with a dead pig's head, and waited for the intruder to make his walk of shame. Still, that's rare. More often, these spaces serve as little sanctuaries, where the brutal edges of Viking life are eased by warm water and unspoken understanding. And if something happens, if 2 people leave together, or 3, or someone new finds themselves invited into a shared moment of affection, well, that's just part of the fog. The bathhouse sees all and gossips never. As you begin to rinse off and prepare to leave, someone hands you a cup of warm herbal brew. It tastes like mint, smoke, and something slightly sweet. A thank you for your company, maybe. Or a beginning. Outside, the air hits your wet skin like a slap from Thor himself. But you're cleaner now, softer around the edges. The world seems quieter, even though nothing's really changed except you. There's a scholarly debate bubbling in your mind as you towel off under a tree. Some argue these co-ed bathhouses were rare, even scandalous. Others say they were commonplace in Scandinavia, a holdover from even older traditions of communal nudity. The archaeological evidence is scattered. Soapstones, fire pits, carbonised wood from bathhouse floors. But the sagas are clear. These places existed, and they were important. Tomorrow you'll stumble into death rites and the shadowy connections between mourning and sexuality, funerals, farewells, and what it means to honour someone with more than just words. But for now, pull your clothes over your skin, still tingling with heat and strange peace. Walk slowly back to the longhouse, steam trailing behind you, like the last whispers of the fire. You're barely out of your warm bathhouse haze when the horns blow, long, low, sorrowful. It echoes off the hills like a mourning song carved into stone. The village slows. Conversations die in mid-sentence. A child stops chasing a chicken. People glance toward the fjord and to begin walking, heads low, voices quiet. Someone's died. Death here doesn't come with silence and black clothes. It comes with ceremony, rituals steeped in myth, magic, and strangely enough, sex. And today, you're going to witness one of the oldest and most complex of Viking traditions, a high-status funeral. The dead man was a respected landowner and minor chieftain, his wealth built from trade routes and favour with neighbouring clans. His body lies now on a stone platform draped in fur, arms crossed, sword at his side, silver rings still shining on stiff fingers. Around him are offerings, bowls of grain, pieces of jewellery, even his favourite game board. Everything he might need in the afterlife. But the most curious thing isn't the items, it's the people. A group of women, all seem dressed in dark blue cloaks, move slowly around the body. They're led by an older woman with thick grey braids and eyes like river ice. She's a Volva, or Cirrus, and today she's not casting love spells. Today she's guiding a soul into the next world and preparing the path with a series of rites that blur the lines between reverence, release, and desire. As the ceremony unfolds, you're told about grave maidens, women selected, sometimes voluntarily, sometimes not, to accompany the deceased into the afterlife. In earlier centuries, these women might be sacrificed, symbolically or literally, depending on the customs of the region and the status of the dead. But by this time, it's more common for a woman to play a ritual role in the burial, honouring the dead with gestures that frankly get very intimate. You hear whispers of an old custom, one final coupling before burial, not for pleasure, not even for the living, but as a symbolic act, returning vitality to the earth or easing the spirit's journey. The body, already washed and oiled, is touched, blessed, sometimes even straddled by the vulva in what can only be described as a metaphysical send-off. It's not sexual in the conventional sense. It's sacred. It's surreal. You watch as the vulva traces symbols on the dead man's chest with a bone needle dipped in honey and ash. Her voice hums low, almost like a lullaby, but with a bite underneath. The crowd stands still. The children are gone. You realise now this is more than a farewell. This is theatre. This is myth made flesh. And then comes the part people have been murmuring about since dawn. The farewell rite performed by his companion, a woman named Anna. She's not his wife. That woman died years ago. Anna was his lover, a former thrall freed after bearing him a son. Their union was never blessed by legal rights, but everyone knows she was the true partner of his final years. Now she steps forward, shedding her cloak, revealing intricate tattoos that wind down her arms and across her stomach like ivy. She kneels beside the body and begins to chant. You don't understand the words, but the tone makes your chest tighten. Her movements are slow, deliberate. She touches his brow, his hands, then rests her palm over his heart. It's an echo of something older, maybe something primal. You feel like you shouldn't be watching, but you can't look away. This rite blurs boundaries. Is it mourning, magic, performance? Kind of closure so raw that modern rituals pale beside it. The fringe fact you gather from an older man later is that some Viking funerals, especially for high-status men, ended with acts of communal catharsis, feasting, storytelling, and sometimes ritualized intimacy. Some rites included symbolic couplings between the mourners to honour the generative force of the departed. Not orgies exactly, but a reminder that death doesn't cancel desire. In some ways, it makes it more urgent. And while these customs seem wild, even grotesque, to modern eyes, they weren't designed to shock. They were meant to heal, to reconnect the living with life. In a world where winters kill and childbirth takes mothers, where warriors vanish into foreign soil and sons don't come home, the body becomes sacred in every form. Loving, fighting, dying. It's all connected. There's a scholarly debate here that rages like a forest fire. Some historians believe these more erotic elements of Viking funerals are exaggerated, based on accounts by outsiders like Ibn Fadlan, who describe the wild rituals of the Rus with equal parts awe and horror. Others argue that Norse culture embraced sexuality as part of the life-death cycle, refusing to draw the harsh moral lines introduced by later Christian influence. Back in the present, the body is lifted onto a prepared boat, his death ship. Along with offerings, his sword, and a carved totem of Freya. Fire is brought forward, slow and solemn. The flames catch on the edge of his cloak first, then his beard, then the sails. The boat is pushed into the fjord, drifting out as smoke trails behind like a second soul. As the boat burns, the crowd begins to sing, a low chant that pulses through your ribs like thunder in the bones. People touch hands, rest foreheads together, weep openly. No one pretends to be fine. No one hides. And when the flames finally die and the last bit of charred wood sinks beneath the black water, Anna returns to the shore. She stands tall, face streaked with ash and salt. Someone places a cloak around her shoulders. She does not cry. You walk back to the village in silence, surrounded by people who've just watched death and desire touch hands under a sky full of gods. Tomorrow you'll laugh again, because Loki's about to make things weird with his shapeshifting and some very awkward parenting. But tonight, let this weight stay with you. Let it remind you that even in a world of axes and frostbite, love still burns long after the body turns to smoke. The next day breaks colder than usual, the kind of cold that clings to your ribs and makes your teeth think about quitting. But there's a weird sort of anticipation in the air. Like the village knows something strange is brewing and everyone's pretending they don't hear the pot bubbling. That's how it always starts when Loki enters the conversation. Trickster, shapeshifter, serial boundary obliterator. The Norse gods are chaotic at the best of times, but Loki is pure entropy in a smirk. And today, you're about to learn why the Viking gods made our modern TV anti-heroes look like tame puppies. You're sitting in the longhouse sipping something vaguely warm and suspiciously bitter, when a boy stands up and declares he knows the real story of Loki's horse baby. The room goes quiet, not because anyone doubts him, but because this tale is sacred and absurd in equal measure. So here it is. Once, the gods wanted to build a great wall around Asgard. A mysterious builder offered to do it in record time if he could marry Freya and take the sun and moon as payment. Bold, right. The gods agreed, but only if he could finish the work alone and without help. Naturally, he brings along his mighty stallion, Svadilfari, who does half the work himself, hauling massive stones like a mythological forklift on steroids. The gods realize too late they're about to lose their favourite goddess, their light sources, and their pride. So they panic and turn to Loki, who, as always, has a plan. He transforms himself into a mare, yes, a female horse, and lures the stallion away in the night. What follows is never detailed, but the result is a bouncing baby, 8-legged horse, named Sleipnir, who becomes Odin's favourite ride. You can't decide what's weirder, that the god of mischief gave birth, that no one seems particularly horrified by this, or that the gods casually kept the horse. Best steed I ever rode, Odin once reportedly said, as if that somehow justifies everything. What makes this tale so potent is what it reveals about Viking ideas of gender and boundaries. They didn't have them, not like we do. Loki, a male god, takes female form to prevent disaster. He gets pregnant, he gives birth, and instead of being shunned, he's mocked. Yes, but also respected. He's still a god, he still gets invited to feasts. He just has, a horse son. You spend the afternoon listening to variations of this and other Loki stories. The one where he disguises himself as a milkmaid to steal Thor's hammer. The one where he accuses all the gods of sexual misdeeds, and, honestly, most of them don't even deny it. The one where he arranges for the death of Balder, then shapeshifts into a salmon to escape judgment. The salmon bit's especially ironic considering Loki's sexual track record. There's an edge to these stories, humour, sure, but also unease. Loki challenges everything. The roles of gods and mortals, men and women, lovers and liars. He's transgressive, and in Viking culture, transgression is both dangerous and sacred. It's the necessary chaos that makes the universe spin. You learn a fringe fact from an aging storyteller named Ottrig, who claims that in some early cults, certain shamans would wear dresses during rituals invoking Loki. Not because they were pretending to be women, but because they were honouring the god's ability to transcend form. He's not male, Ottrig says, eyes glinting. He's Loki. That's the category. But here's where things get messy. Loki isn't just a fun-loving rule-breaker. He's also the father of monstrous children, Hel, the half-dead goddess of the underworld, Jörmungandr, the world's serpent, Fenrir, the wolf who will devour Odin during Ragnarok. Even Sleipnir, depending on how you interpret the symbolism, represents a boundary between life and death, chaos and control. It's almost like every time Loki bends gender or social order, the universe pays a price. There's an ongoing scholarly debate around this. Some argue Loki is a relic of older Indo-European trickster myths, archetypes of transformation and fluidity. Others think his stories were twisted over time by Christian scribes who wanted to portray him as morally corrupt. But when you hear the stories told by firelight, without scholars or scribes, you feel something else. Awe, not judgment, not disgust, just the stunned silence that comes from confronting the raw chaos of the divine. Later that night, as the wind howls and the longhouse quiets down, someone carves a crude horse figure into the beams near your bed. A reminder, they say smirking, that sometimes the weirdest solution is the right one, and it makes sense. In a world where death is always nearby and the gods themselves make mistakes, the lines blur. A man can become a mayor, a trick can save a world, a scandal can become a symbol. You fall asleep thinking of that 8-legged horse thundering across the sky, its hooves echoing with every rule Loki ever broke. And somehow you don't feel confused. You feel impressed. Tomorrow you'll get to witness the Viking version of a duel and see what happens when someone turns words into blood over matters of honour, pride, and what someone did or didn't do in bed. But tonight, let your dreams shape-shift gallop and grin their way through a sky filled with gods who refuse to play by the rules. You wake to tension so thick it could be cut with a dull spoon. The longhouse is quieter than usual, no laughter, no morning grumbles, just a heavy kind of silence broken only by the occasional cough or clink of a cup. Something's happened. You step outside and find the villagers gathered in a loose circle near the training field, expressions tight, eyes sharp. 2 men stand in the centre. Sten, a wiry fisherman with a crooked nose and far too much pride, and Eric, a broad-shouldered farmer who rarely speaks unless it's to insult someone's ploughing technique. They've drawn swords. This isn't just a squabble. It's a holmgang, a formal duel. And, as it turns out, the cause isn't stolen sheep or land disputes. It's an accusation involving Eric's wife, a fish rack, and what Sten claimed happened behind it last spring. Apparently the verse he recited last night by the fire, something about salted cod and borrowed beds, wasn't just poetic flourish. It was a jab, and now it's drawing blood. You watch as the rules are laid out. The ground is marked 9 paces by 9 paces, shields are placed, witnesses called. Each man can bring a second, but both have declined. They want this settled directly, the way Viking pride demands. And once the duel begins, it won't stop until someone bleeds, yields, or dies. What's fascinating is how common this was, not just for physical grievances, but for verbal ones, especially those tied to sex. A man's reputation could be shattered by a well-placed verse, especially if it suggested he was sexually passive, unfaithful, or just underwhelming. In this society, your standing wasn't secured by gold or titles alone. It lived and died in how others spoke about your body, your prowess, your role in the tangled dance of desire. You remember from earlier, being called arger, unmanly, passive, shamefully soft, was the ultimate insult. It didn't matter if it was true. The mere accusation required a response. To ignore it was to accept it. So here you are, watching 2 grown men about to slice each other over what one of them may or may not have done behind drying fish. The duel begins. There's no grand declaration, no dramatic music, just the quiet shing of blades unsheathing, the crunch of boots on the frost-hardened earth. They circle each other like wolves with too much history. Sten makes the first move, a shallow cut that Eric dodges with ease. The crowd murmurs, half rooting, half dreading. And in this moment, you realise how much sexual reputation here is tied to violence. Not just physical acts, but the idea of them, the stories, the verses. If someone accuses you of being the woman in a sexual encounter, they're saying more than just that. They're saying you're weak, cowardly, beneath the dignity of your ancestors. The scholarly debate around this gets heated. Some historians argue these honour codes were ways to maintain social order in a world without centralised law. Others suggest it was raw patriarchy, weaponising sex as a tool of control. Either way, it's clear. Words cut deep, but blades cut deeper. After a few more exchanges, Eric lands a solid blow across Sten's thigh. Not fatal, but painful enough to drop him to one knee. There's blood, that's enough. Technically, the duel's done, but then something surprising happens. Eric doesn't sheath his sword. Instead, he leans down and says something you can't hear. Whatever it is, Sten flinches like he's been slapped. Eric turns, throws his blade into the dirt, and walks away without another word. The message is clear. He could have ended him, but didn't. And that restraint, in a culture built on blood, might just be the loudest statement of all. Sten is helped away, limping, jaw tight. No cheers, no triumph, just a somber kind of acceptance. The crowd disperses slowly, as if shaken by how close the whole thing came to spiralling. Later that day, you find Eric sharpening his different blade, his scythe. You sit beside him, awkward at first, unsure if the duel is something he wants to talk about. Eventually he says, "I loved her once, maybe I still do." He doesn't say who he means, maybe his wife, maybe the truth, maybe something else entirely. He doesn't elaborate. That night, over dinner, someone jokes about Sten's leg wound, making him walk like a swan in heat. The laughter is nervous. No one wants to be the next name called to the dueling field. Words are sharp here, sharper than swords sometimes. The fringe fact you pick up from the village law speaker is that certain duels were ritualized to the point where death was rare. They weren't always about killing, they were about rebalancing, showing strength, reclaiming honor. Still, people died, enough that some villages eventually outlawed holmgangs, replacing them with fines or exile. But not here, not yet. Before bed, you can't help but replay the duel. The poetry of it, really. Two men standing inside a square of sacred ground, fighting over what may have been nothing more than a verse. But in this world, a verse is never just a verse. It's a weapon, a confession, a curse. Tomorrow you'll seek something lighter, something carved, etched, scratched into stone and bone, runestones and love notes, graffiti of the Viking heart. But tonight, let the quiet of the longhouse settle around you like a blanket, and be thankful no one said anything slanderous about your fish-drying habits. By now, you've slept beside raiders, eaten with witches, and watched more erotic rituals than you'd ever admit at a family dinner. But today feels quieter. You wake to birdsong and the faint tapping of a chisel against stone, a sound so steady it could be mistaken for a heartbeat if you weren't listening closely. You follow it, drawn through the village like a moth to flame, until you find the source, an old man hunched over a slab of granite, carefully carving lines that look like tangled vines from a distance, an ancient language up close. He's working on a runestone, not one of the towering ones. This is a smaller memorial, about waist high, with red pigment rubbed into the grooves to help the letters catch the light. You crouch beside him and watch the words slowly appear in that distinct angular script. He's writing a name followed by a phrase that roughly translates to most beloved, strongest of hearts. It's a tribute, yes, but you can tell by the way he works, slowly, reverently, that this is more than just a eulogy. This is a love letter carved in stone. Runestones are everywhere in Viking lands, standing beside roads, leaning against churches half buried in fields. Some mark graves, others boast of voyages or family ties, but a handful, well, they get personal, intimate, downright suspicious. You come across one not far from the blacksmith's house that reads, "Thorgada raised this stone for Jorund, who was dearer to her than breath." Another, tucked behind a collapsed barn, simply says, "He kissed me once, the gods wept with envy." You find yourself hunting for more, like a secret treasure map of ancient affection. Some are poetic, others are blunt. One says, "She was good in the bed, better in the boat." There's debate among the villagers about who it's referring to, but everyone agrees it's high praise either way. The fringe fact you learn from the carver, his name's Alvi, and his beard appears to have its own climate, is that some people paid skalds to compose love inscriptions for them, especially if they weren't great with words. "Not everyone can say what they feel," he mutters, chipping away at a tricky rune. "But you put it in stone, it lasts longer than regret." And there's the crux of it. In a world where fire takes what it wants, and winter wipes clean what's left behind, carving something into rock is the ultimate act of permanence. And when that carving isn't a battle record or a farm deed, but a confession of love or longing or lust, it's not just brave, it's defiant. You meet a woman named Randy who shows you a stone she had carved for her dead lover, even though they were never married. His wife hated it, she says with a smirk, but he always said I was the one who understood his verses. You ask if she'd ever consider removing it. Her smirk grows. Let her try. There's a runestone near the edge of the village, half sunk in mud, that no one will claim. It reads, "I dreamed of your hands even before I met them." Some say it was written by a woman to a man. Others swear it was between two warriors who never returned from the same raid. No one knows for sure. That mystery, you suspect, is part of the magic. You spot one stone that's clearly a joke, or at least you hope it is. Eric loved women, mead, and not waking up next to either. It's less poetic and more roast, but that's Viking humour for you, gritty, sharp, and always teetering between affection and insult. Back in the longhouse that night, the conversation drifts to famous runes and the power they hold. Someone swears they saw a stone that changed its writing with the weather, confessing love in rain, then returning to cold silence when the sun came out. A drunk skald suggests carving a runestone for every failed relationship, then throwing them into the fjord to weigh down your emotional baggage. Everyone laughs. Everyone also thinks about it for a second too long. There's a scholarly debate brewing in your mind as you sip from a shared horn. Were these romantic inscriptions widespread, or are we just finding the quirkiest ones and projecting? Some researchers argue that erotic or emotional runes were rare, anomalies in a mostly pragmatic medium. Others believe there were far more, but many have been lost to erosion, church renovations, or simply the hush of time. One theory even suggests that certain love messages were deliberately hidden, carved on the backsides of stones or beneath the soil line, secret symbols of longing not meant for general eyes. But here, among these people, the runes are alive. They're touchable, readable, interpretable. A coded language of passion that transcends time. You begin to imagine lovers sneaking out at night to carve initials into stone, hoping the gods are too distracted to notice, or perhaps hoping they do notice. Before bed, you find a small stone left on your sleeping furs. Just a pebble, really, but someone scratched a tiny rune into it. You don't recognize the symbol. When you ask Alvy the next morning, he squints at it and says, "That one means want. Could mean anything. Food, fire, or something warmer." You keep the stone, and tomorrow you'll find yourself slipping into the world of secret faith, of Christian converts and the quiet battles between new beliefs and old desires. But tonight, let your dreams be carved in the soft stone of your mind, where nothing fades, and every whisper might outlive the winds. You wake to the sound of bells, not the usual clang of a blacksmith hammering, or the clatter of livestock bells, but softer, more deliberate. A slow, single chime echoing through the morning mist. You follow it toward the edge of the village, past the last goat pens and up a narrow hill path, where a cluster of people stands near a small wooden building. It's new, almost too new. The wood still smells fresh. The beams are clean, unweathered. There's a carved cross above the doorway, simple and a little crooked, like someone wasn't entirely sure if it should be there at all. This is a kirkja, a Christian meeting house, and today you're about to witness the subtle war playing out across Viking society, not between nations, but between gods, between ways of being. And at the heart of it, as always, is sex. The priest is pale and thin, his robe more sack than silk, but his voice is steady as he welcomes everyone in. You step inside and immediately feel the difference. No smoke, no ale, no furs or carved eagles with exaggerated anatomy. It's quiet, orderly, austere. The air smells of wax and damp pine. A few wooden benches line the walls. There's a hand-carved altar, a plain wooden cross, and a book that no one except the priest can read. Most of the crowd is young, curious, cautious. Some shift awkwardly, as if afraid they'll catch sin by standing too close to the altar. Others wear small crosses beneath their tunics, half concealed, half defiant. You notice two older women whispering near the door, and you catch the phrase, "He won't last the winter." Whether they mean the priest or the new faith, you're not sure. The sermon is about purity. The priest speaks of marriage, of fidelity, of resisting temptation. He warns against lust, calls it a snare for the soul, something that pulls you away from divine purpose. He never raises his voice, but each word seems to push back against everything the village has known for generations. The mead hall laughter, the fertility rites, the casual touch of a hand on a thigh by the fire. This man is telling them it's all wrong. You glance at a young couple seated near the back, arms touching, eyes flicking toward each other every time the priest mentions impure thoughts. They're trying not to smile, trying and failing. You learn that this priest was sent from the east through trade routes and whispers, part of a slow campaign to bring salvation, or control, depending on who's talking, to the northern lands. Christianity spreads not by sword here, but by suggestion, a new way to marry, a new way to mourn, and most importantly, new rules about who gets to touch whom and when and why. But not everyone's buying it. Later, in the longhouse, you sit beside a woman named Svala who's been to the kirkja a few times. She shrugs. I like the songs. They sing better than we do. But their god is shy about breasts. She laughs into her cup. I'm not. You ask her what she thinks about the idea of saving yourself for marriage. She snorts. I tried it once, didn't take. Then she leans in, lowers her voice. Truth is, some of us follow both. The gods don't mind, they're used to sharing. There's a growing trend of double faith, people attending the kirkja on Sundays, then offering a coin or a slice of bread to Freyja on Monday. It's not hypocrisy, it's hedging bets. If one god doesn't catch your prayer, maybe the next will. The fringe fact you pick up from a former raider named Bjorn is that some early Christian converts kept a secret stash of fertility charms under their beds, just in case. Never know when you'll need a carved phallus and a Hail Mary, he says with a wink. But the tension is real. A farmer tells you his sister was married in the kirkja, and the priest refused to let her wear her traditional goddess pendant. Said it was obscene. You ask what the pendant looked like. He grins. Just a little man, very enthusiastic. And here's the irony. In trying to suppress sexuality, Christianity has sometimes made it louder, more forbidden, more tantalizing. What was once public and sacred becomes private and shameful, which only adds fuel to the fire. There's a reason people keep sneaking off to the woods after these sermons. That night, you attend a gathering at the kirkja again, not a service, but a kind of quiet dinner. Bread, broth, and a new convert reading softly from scripture. It's peaceful, comforting even. But across the table you see two people, newly married, hands tightly intertwined under the bench, and you can tell they've memorized the priest's warnings, but haven't fully bought in. You wonder what their wedding night was like. Silent? Careful? Or did they fall into each other like everyone else does? Rules forgotten the moment lips meet. There's a scholarly debate bubbling in your mind as you walk home. Some believe the shift to Christianity killed Norse sexuality, replacing it with shame, guilt, silence. Others argue that Viking culture adapted, folding the new beliefs into the old without ever fully surrendering. The truth seems to lie in these moments, where a woman wears a cross and a rune, where a man listens to a sermon but still whispers poetry shaped like desire. Before sleep, you glance out the window and see a shadow pass near the old shrine to Freyja. Someone's left fresh flowers, a thank you maybe, or a bribe. Tomorrow you'll join a feast again, this time in a hall soaked with mead and flirtation, where the fire burns hotter and the looks get longer. But tonight, lie back under the thatched roof and wonder which gods are watching, and whether they care who you kiss, or just that you mean it. The next morning rolls in wrapped in golden haze and wood smoke, a brief return to warmth before the next cold front hits. You stretch under your wool blanket, stiff from yesterday's quiet contemplation, but the smell in the air tells you today's tone will be wildly different. Roasted meat, fresh bread, that sweet mead spice scent that seeps into your clothes and dreams. It's feast day again, not a holy day, not a solemn rite, just a celebration. And in Viking terms, that means music, meat, and more flirting than a mead-drenched tavern brawl could shake loose. By midday, the longhouse is alive. Smoke rises from the fire pit in aromatic swirls, and the benches are loaded with food. Whole trout stuffed with herbs, steaming pots of barley stew, flatbread so hot it steams when torn. You're handed a horn of mead before you can even sit. No one eats alone here, not on feast day. You wedge yourself between two already chatting women, and an elderly man who immediately asks if you're spoken for. He's teasing, mostly. You look around and spot Svala, the same Svala who chuckled about Christian prudery just yesterday, dressed in a brighter tunic now, red with gold embroidery, her hair braided with tiny bone beads. She's holding court at the edge of the hearth, laughing at something a young warrior just said. He looks smug. She looks like she's deciding whether he's worth the effort. This is what the feast is for. Alliances, flirtations, matchmaking, mischief, and all of it served up alongside boar fat and ballads. A group of skalds stands near the far wall, instruments in hand, already playing a bawdy song about a goat, a widow, and an accident involving a ladder. The crowd cackles. Someone adds a verse. The music weaves between benches like a rope, pulling everyone closer. You get bumped by a man trying to pass around a whole roast goose, and when you apologise, he winks and says, "No need, unless you want to do it again." Subtlety is optional here. You quickly realise Viking feasts are one of the rare spaces where the rules loosen. Marital status becomes a soft suggestion. Glances last longer. Hands brush more often. The drink, the music, the heat, it all works together like an invisible matchmaker. And while some people stick to their partners, plenty don't. A married woman kisses a trader on the cheek. A young man feeds a thrall girl bits of honey cake. A man and woman leave the hall entirely, unnoticed or deliberately ignored. You lean over to ask your benchmate how people handle jealousy here. She shrugs. If it's serious, you speak. If it's just for a night, you sing a better verse. Her tone is light, but there's something honest in it. Love and sex here aren't always entangled. You can have one without the other. And sometimes, when the mead is flowing, you forget which you wanted in the first place. The fringe fact you pick up from a very drunk skald named Finn is that feast nights often included bedding games. These weren't games in the modern sense. They were competitions, rhyming challenges, flirtation duels, even staged mock proposals to get people laughing, loosening up, maybe even sneaking off into the dark. One common tradition involved a circle of guests reciting increasingly scandalous lines of poetry, and whoever failed to keep up had to serve drinks or share a kiss, or more. There's a reason mead halls had corners, you learn, and curtain rods, and sometimes conveniently placed furs, but not everything is so carefree. A young woman suddenly slaps her drinking companion and storms out. You hear someone mutter that he asked if she shared a bed as easily as she shared a cup. Too far. Consent here matters, even on feast day. You see it in the way someone steps in to escort her out. No questions asked. The man is left red-faced and suddenly friendless. Still, for every stumble, there's a dozen more moments of connection. A shared laugh over a spilled drink, a shoulder touch that lingers just a heartbeat too long, a secret look passed across the flames. You catch one couple in a quiet alcove, clearly new to each other. They're not even touching yet, just leaning close, trading whispered verses like precious coins. You hear only snippets, something about storm-wet hair and hands like thunder. The words make you blush and you're not even involved. There's a scholarly debate running in the back of your mind now, whether these kinds of feasts were truly that free, or if the sagas just like to make them sound spicier. Some historians argue the reality was more restrained. Arranged marriages, social hierarchies, pressure to conform, others point to poetry, artifacts, and laws that hint at a deeply human, flexible, even celebratory view of desire. In truth, both are probably right. Feasts were layered, ritual and chaos, order and seduction, all tangled together like braids in a festival crown. By late night, the mead's gone warm, the fire's burned low, and the music's turned soft and slow. A few couples are gone entirely. Others curl against each other, speaking softly or sharing quiet kisses behind raised cloaks. The feast is winding down, not with a bang, but with a sigh. You lie down near the edge of the hearth, using a rolled cloak as a pillow, full and buzzing with the hum of it all. The light flickers across the beams overhead, dancing like shadows caught mid-embrace. Somewhere nearby, someone starts humming a lullaby about a maiden who kissed a king and woke with fire in her lungs. It's haunting and beautiful and just ambiguous enough to count as both a warning and a blessing. Tomorrow you'll dive into the tangled world of Viking contraception, herbs, charms, and whispered advice passed from midwives to curious girls behind closed doors. But tonight, let the warmth of food and fire and unspoken invitation settle over you like a second skin. No shame, no pretense. Just the soft glow of people wanting, and sometimes daring to reach out. You wake to the sound of quiet chatter and the rustle of dried leaves being crushed underfoot. Outside the longhouse, the sun's still low, and the air smells like cold ash, damp moss, and something sweet, like fennel or maybe wild thyme. You follow the scent through the back path that snakes past the livestock pens and toward a small hut nestled under a leaning pine. This is the home of Brynja, the village's unofficial herbalist, midwife, and keeper of secrets. If anyone knows about Viking birth control, it's her. You knock once and she doesn't look up. She's already grinding something in a stone bowl, arms bare, streaked with clay. "You're here for the leaves or the story?" she asks. "Or both?" Both, obviously. You sit by the fire as she brews tea that smells like anise and sweat. Around the hut are bundles of dried herbs, nettle, juniper, mugwort and others with names she refuses to translate. There are bones hanging from the rafters, carved with runes, and a set of stone jars labelled only by scratches. Brynja hands you a cup. "Drink if you're not trying to make a child," she says with a grin. "If you are, I suggest you run." Viking contraception, it turns out, wasn't a one-size-fits-all thing. It was a patchwork of herbs, prayers, and practical advice passed from woman to woman, usually in whispers behind woven curtains or in bathhouses when the men were too hungover to eavesdrop. Brynja walks you through some of the methods. Teas made from wild carrot seed, which supposedly prevented implantation, poultices from crushed juniper berries, pessaries made from wool soaked in vinegar or herbs. Some worked better than others, most worked mostly by luck. The weirdest method she mentions, a charm tied around the thigh, made from fox fur and carved bone. "You wear it until your moon blood returns," she says, completely serious. "Then you bury it under a fruit tree, it's symbolic." You ask what the bone is from, she sips her tea. "Don't ask. There's no formal science here, but plenty of trial and error. And while you might assume that contraception was frowned upon in this culture, it wasn't. Not really. Children were precious, yes, but timing mattered. A baby born in the wrong season could die before its first summer. A woman giving birth too close to her last delivery might not survive it. So herbs and talismans weren't about avoiding motherhood. They were about surviving it. The fringe fact you learn from an older woman helping Brynja sort leaves is that some women swore by sex during certain moon phases to prevent pregnancy. "If the moon is full and your belly is not," she says cryptically, "you're safe." You press her for more details, but she just winks and hands you a bundle of mint. For your breath, not for your womb. Even the gods get involved. Freya, the goddess of love, was often invoked during childbirth, but also in rituals meant to delay it. Some fertility charms could be reversed, symbols drawn backward, words whispered into running water instead of fire. It was all about intention. You could ask the gods to grant life, or to wait. You ask Brynja how she learned all this. She shrugs. "My mother, and her mother, and then from the women who came to me crying." She says the hard truth is that when the men leave on raids, and the longhouse grows cold, the women left behind are not always alone. They want comfort, they want touch, but they don't always want a baby. And it's not just the women. Men came to her too, quietly, desperate. A young man once begged her for something to make a girl forget what they'd done. Another wanted a charm to ensure his wife couldn't conceive because he feared dying before the child was born. Brynja gave them herbs and charged extra. Fear is expensive, as she tells you matter of fact. There's a scholarly debate you chew on as she talks. How much of this was real medicine, and how much was placebo wrapped in superstition? Some historians argue that Viking contraception was rudimentary at best, and any success was sheer luck. Others point to cross-cultural evidence. Romans, Egyptians, even pre-Christian Celts all had similar herbal methods. If nothing else, it shows that women everywhere were trying to navigate love without consequence, or at least with choice. As the tea cools, Brynja hands you a small pouch. Inside are 3 herbs and a tiny sliver of carved wood. "Tuck it into your belt," she says, "not because it works, but because it makes you walk with intention." You spend the rest of the afternoon listening to other women in the village share their stories. One had 6 children and swears by raspberry leaf. Another says she placed a rune under her mattress and didn't get pregnant until she removed it 3 years later. One woman, already 3 months along, says she tried all the herbs but clearly did something wrong. Everyone laughs, including her. What's clear through all of it is that Viking women weren't passive participants in sex and reproduction. They were observant, clever, resourceful. The midwife wasn't just a healer. She was a counsellor, a chemist, a confessor. And the tools they used, however primitive, were wielded with the full force of ancient wisdom. Before bed, you tuck the pouch from Brynja under your cloak, if only because it feels like you're carrying a secret now. Not a scandalous one, just something quiet and powerful, a piece of a larger story. Tomorrow you'll witness the other side of that story, childbirth itself, blood, breath, belief, and all the strange superstitions that surrounded Viking motherhood. But tonight, lie still under the furs and let the scent of herbs cling to your clothes. You're in a world where sex is sacred, but so is control, the choice of when, how, and whether to create life. You wake to a scream, not a cry of fear or anger, but the full-bellied, bone-deep sound of a woman giving birth. It cuts through the air like thunder, raw and unfiltered, a sound older than any god or rune. You sit up so fast your neck cracks. Outside, the village is already stirring, though no one looks surprised. Just alert, focused. This isn't an emergency. This is the beginning of something. You follow the low buzz of voices to a smaller longhouse near the stream, marked by a string of feathers and charms hanging from the doorpost. This is where births happen, a sacred space set apart. Inside, it's dim and hot. The fire is low, the air thick with the scents of sweat, moss, boiled water, and crushed herbs. Women move in quiet efficiency, some offering bowls of broth, others massaging the labouring woman's lower back. The midwife, of course, is Brynja. The woman in labour is Solveig, a farmer's wife. She's young, strong, and definitely not interested in your concern. She's gripping a leather strap tied to a ceiling beam, legs braced. Wide, teeth clenched. Between contractions, she growls at her sister for boiling the wrong herbs. When the next wave hits, she roars like she's giving birth to a dragon. Brynja moves like she's part of the floor, unshakable, calm, whispering encouragement and flicking sweat from Solveig's brow. At her side is an apprentice, maybe 14, eyes wide but hands steady. The rhythm of the room is ancient. Push, breathe, press, chant, repeat. In the corner, someone hums a low melody, a kind of birthing song that sounds like wind through pine. You're allowed to sit in the corner and observe. Quietly, respectfully. This is a female space, a circle of power where words mean less than presence. Eventually you lean toward an older woman kneading cloths in hot water. You ask in a whisper if all births happen like this. She chuckles. Sometimes there's more blood, sometimes there's more silence, but the gods always get involved. And they do. Hanging over the bed is a carved figure of Freya, small, wooden, worn smooth by countless hands. At Solveig's feet lies a goat skull dusted with ash and herbs. Runes have been painted on her thighs, symbols meant to invoke protection and speed. Someone has braided red thread into her hair, protection against the wandering spirits said to slip in when a baby is halfway between worlds. Birth in Viking culture isn't just physical, it's metaphysical. It's a door opening between life and death, and nobody knows which side you'll land on. Babies die, mothers die, sometimes both. So they prepare, with charms, with whispered prayers, with knives nearby in case something needs cutting or defending. The fringe fact you pick up from Brynja between contractions is that some women swallowed small carved amulets during labour, usually made of soapstone or bone. To give the baby something to follow out, she explains, eyes never leaving Solveig's face. You ask if it works. She shrugs. Sometimes the gods like symbols. Sometimes they ignore us entirely. Hours pass in a strange, suspended time. The room shifts. The fire grows hotter. The singing fades into humming. Solveig drifts in and out of focus, sweat slicked across her skin like oil. At one point she grabs your wrist without looking. Her grip is terrifying. She doesn't let go until the next contraction passes. Then finally it happens. A cry, not hers this time, but small and high and piercing, the kind of sound that cuts through bone and floods the heart. The baby is here, red, wet, furious, a boy. Everyone moves at once, cord cut with a flint blade, baby cleaned. Salt rubbed gently across his skin, an old ritual to purify and strengthen. He's swaddled and placed on his mother's chest, still sticky, still screaming. Solveig just laughs, hoarse, weak, disbelieving. The room shifts again, from heat to relief, from effort to celebration. And the work isn't done. Brynja checks Solveig carefully. There's blood, but not too much. The afterbirth is delivered, wrapped in cloth, and taken outside to be buried near the doorway, a tradition meant to anchor the child's spirit. If it's burned, the soul might wander. If it's buried too deep, the child might be slow to speak. Every act has a meaning. A quiet ritual follows. The father arrives. He stands at the door, waiting to be invited in. Once he steps inside, he places a carved object, a small token, maybe a toy, maybe a tool, next to the baby. This is his first gift. A silent promise. He doesn't touch the child right away. That comes later. For now, he touches Solveig's forehead and whispers her name like a spell. You ask Brynja if they'll try again soon.